Camilla Lima was a wealthy heiress. Her parents were old money Boston aristocrats. She shared her father's passion for show dogs, and Camilla quickly showed herself to be an excellent trainer and became well known in dog breeding circles. According to her sister Mary, she was a good handler and a good breeder of Clumber Spaniels. She never dated or married. Her dogs were her life. A solitary spinster, she lived with her parents on their 100-acre estate. In 1968, her father died from lung cancer, which reportedly devastated Camilla. She became more withdrawn from her family, eventually cutting them off almost entirely. She grew more eccentric and began to make an unexpected change in her personal life. Starting in the mid-1970s, Mary noticed that the estate was not being taken care of properly. Camilla became an eccentric recluse and spent more time with her dogs than she did with people. Her appearance began to change as well. Camilla started taking steroids to get more masculine features. Between 1978 and 1985, her voice deepened, she began to develop facial hair, she began wearing men's clothing, and legally changed her name to Cam. Around 1981, Cam started to associate with a fellow dog owner named George O'Neill. George was eventually hired by Cam, becoming the caretaker of his estate. He took to paying Cam's bills and arranged rides to the dog shows. Eventually, he started taking over Lima's finances and became Cam's only confidant. It was O'Neill who convinced Cam to purchase a 40-acre estate in Hopkinton, Rhode Island, where Cam would spend the remainder of his life in seclusion, along with the 58 dogs that he kept on the property. He was reportedly a cranky neighbor who rarely spoke to anyone else and left O'Neill to feed his dogs and bring him the mail, etc. Cam had the strange habit of hiding large amounts of cash around the house and kept a case filled with valuable jewelry at his side at all times. In 1984, Cam took the step of giving O'Neill power of attorney over his estate. Also, Cam wrote out a will giving O'Neill the $400,000 Hopkinton property and $1.9 million, but he had to care for his dogs on the property. In 1978, 3 years after making George O'Neill his heir, he fell off the map completely. His disappearance was discovered when his relatives and friends failed to receive Cam's customary Christmas card. The family was especially concerned because checks that had been sent to Cam were being endorsed with an account number for a bank account in Rhode Island using someone else's signature. In December of 1988, his family initially contacted the police and reported Cam missing. They also contacted the law firm in charge of the Lima Trust. They hired Charles Allen to investigate the disappearance. O'Neill was asked about Cam, who was not concerned about the disappearance at all, claiming he had done it before. The last communication he had had with Cam Lima was on July 17, 1987. According to O'Neill, they were speaking over the phone when the line abruptly went dead. The next day, he went over to the Hopkinton property where he said he found the phone ripped from the wall and the dogs unattended. He never saw Cam again. O'Neill claims that he believed that Cam had gone to Europe to undergo a sex change operation, but gave no reason as to why he thought this or why he neglected to inform anybody about Cam's disappearance. When Charles Allen requested permission to search Cam's property, O'Neill refused this request. Later, when looking over Lima's finances, Allen noticed large amounts of money that had gone missing with no explainable cause. Cam's sister, Mary, does not believe that he would ever leave his beloved dogs behind. In December of 1994, Cam's family asked the probate court to declare him legally dead. The judge declared him legally dead in July of 1995. They also fought to keep Cam's estate from George O'Neill. In the end, O'Neill settled for the Hopkinton property, while the family received Cam's estate. O'Neill quickly sold the property soon afterwards. In 1997, a new police chief reopened the case and began searching Lima's property. On September 24, 1997, Cam's remains were found inside the sewer system near his home by Greg Siner, who had bought and lived in the house. He located the remains after noticing a strange smell from the sewer. Because of its condition, it took over a year for the body to be conclusively identified as that of Cam Lima, and his death was declared a homicide that most likely occurred at the time of his disappearance. Although George O'Neill was the main suspect, he was never charged with the murder. In 2003, he was, however, charged with embezzling $15,000 from Cam Lima. He was sentenced to a year in prison and ordered to pay a $450 fine. He has made only one statement about Cam, saying, "She's dead. I don't know anything about it." Unfortunately, O'Neill died in 2011 without ever being charged. The murder remains unsolved. In 1984, 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews lived in Greeley, Colorado, with her adoptive parents, Jim and Gloria Matthews, who adopted Jonelle when she was only 1 month old. The couple had another daughter who was 16 named Jennifer. On December 20th, Jonelle was dropped off by friends at her family's residence in the 300 block of 43rd Avenue Court in Greeley, Colorado, at approximately 8:15 p.m. She was returning from a Christmas choral program at a nursing home where she had sung with her middle school choir and was to wait for the rest of the family to arrive at home. Her older sister and her father, Jim Matthews, were at a basketball game, and her mother, Gloria Matthews, was visiting relatives out of state. At 8:30, Jonelle answered the phone and wrote down a message from a female teacher for her father, Jim Matthews, who was the principal at Platte Valley Elementary School in Kersey. When her father came home about an hour later from a basketball game, he saw Jonelle's shoes and her shawl near a space heater in the family room. The television and lights were still on, and the portable heater was running on the floor. Jonelle typically sat next to the heater whenever she watched TV. However, there was no sign of Jonelle, and Matthews called the police. Although police did not find any signs of a struggle, they discovered footprints in the snow around the perimeter of the house, and the garage door was open. A large search effort was launched, but Jonelle was never found. Jonelle's DNA had been entered into a national database, but so far there have been no hits. Also, investigators have not found any suspects, DNA at the house, or clues. In May of 1985, a partial scalp fragment was found at a nearby farm. It was determined not to be Jonelle's because her hair had a reddish tint, and the hair on the scalp appeared to be light blonde. Jonelle's biological mother, Terry Vieira Martinez, located the child's adoptive parents in 1997. Vieira Martinez learned about Jonelle's disappearance only at that time. She also discovered that law enforcement had kept her under surveillance for 6 weeks after Jonelle's 1984 abduction before they determined she was not involved. However, because of adoption privacy laws, investigators were unable to tell Terry that Jonelle was missing, as they could not reveal the child's new identity to her biological mother. She has since become friends with Jonelle's adoptive parents. Jim and Gloria believe that their daughter is deceased and have held a memorial service for her. They now live in the Philippines. On December 27, 1988, a man's severed head was found by a man searching for cardboard in a shopping center's trash bin in North Versailles. The man called the cops, and an investigation into the bodiless head was launched. The cut job was apparently rough, hardly executed with Jack the Ripper-like precision, and crude enough to leave no teeth or lower jaw. Later, a disemboweled lung and a pile of human teeth were also found discarded under a tree in a Pittsburgh neighborhood. The man was identified as 22-year-old Anthony Michalowski. Anthony was referred to as a drifter by his friends and family, and would often go off the radar, sometimes for days at a time. He was last seen alive on Christmas Eve of 1988. Family and friends had no idea about his disappearance since they were used to his absences. Michalowski was unemployed and spent much of his free time on Liberty Avenue, known at the time as being a hub for prostitution. Some people speculated that Michalowski himself was a prostitute. However, his family denied this. Because only about 15% of Michalowski's body was found, the coroner couldn't pinpoint the exact cause of death, and, in turn, couldn't classify the death as a homicide. What was known was Michalowski had sedatives in his system, meaning he could have either have been drugged or have overdosed before he was dismembered. However, the coroner stated that Michalowski was either dead or unconscious when he was beheaded. The authorities received plenty of tips about potential human remains that had been found. Many were the remains of deer and other animals, but nothing of any use. With no leads to go on, a local television station hosted a live call-in show to solicit anonymous information from the public in hopes of uncovering a killer or killers. But the case went cold for 4 years until sanitation workers uncovered a thigh in a dumpster in Shadyside. Eventually, the other body parts were recovered, all in trash bags placed in dumpsters around the city. Authorities identified the remains as those of 30-year-old Michael Hickmott. The victim, who had been disemboweled and dismembered like Michalowski, had also been unemployed, although he had previously worked as a prostitute. Hickmott's death led authorities to a suspect named Robert Wayne Marshall, who is a self-proclaimed neo-Nazi vampire and said to be an alcoholic. Law enforcement found several connections to Marshall and Hickmott. The shoulder was found in a dumpster not far from Marshall's apartment, and, even more incriminating, witnesses told police they had seen the two together the weekend before Hickmott's remains were discovered. Authorities soon saw the connection, and an arrest warrant was issued for Marshall on May 6, 1992, setting off a manhunt for the suspected murderer. However, Marshall committed suicide only 2 days after he was charged with Hickmott's murder by overdosing on pills and slashing his wrists and throat. Marshall left a note proclaiming his unhappiness and confusion, confessing that he would no longer be in this world by the time his friend received his letter. Authorities considered him a potential serial killer with perhaps additional victims. There have been no other suspects in the case, and Michalowski's murder remains officially unsolved. Deborah Ann Wolf, often referred to as Debbie, was born on June 19, 1957. She was a 28-year-old nurse and resided 4 miles on the outskirts of Fayetteville, North Carolina, with her 2 dogs. On December 25, 1985, she finished her shift and presumably went home to her isolated cabin. The following morning, Debbie was scheduled to work, but she never arrived. This was very much out of character for her. She hardly ever missed a day at work. The hospital could not contact Debbie, despite making many phone calls. So, after a few hours, they called her mother, Jenny Edwards, and her and a friend, Kevin Gorton, made the trip out to the cabin to check up on her. Because Debbie was particularly neat and meticulous, they were surprised at what they found in and around the cabin. Her car was parked in a different spot than normal. There were beer cans scattered about the property. Her dogs had not been fed. Her uniform was thrown on the kitchen floor, and her purse was shoved behind the bed. While continuing to browse around, Jenny and Kevin saw Debbie's answering machine blinking with unheard messages. They played back the messages on Debbie's answering machine in hope of clues, and heard the voice of a man saying that he had hoped Debbie didn't miss any more days at work, implying that she had been absent, which was not the case at the time of the message. At the time they were listening to the message, Debbie had only been unaccounted for a few hours into her morning shift. They searched the area surrounding a pond in Debbie's backyard. However, no trace of her was found. When Jenny tried to report her daughter missing, she was told by the police that they would not become involved until 72 hours had passed. On December 31st, 5 days after her disappearance, the sheriff's office finally began their investigation. When officers arrived, they had their bloodhound dogs scour the area in hopes of finding Debbie or picking up a scent at the very least, but it was to no avail. Police did not order a search of the nearby pond, as they claimed they believed Jenny Edwards and Kevin Gorton had already done so, despite the fact that they did not have the means or equipment. Frustrated at the Cumberland County Sheriff's Department's incompetence, Jenny Edwards decided to hire her own divers, Kevin Gorton and Gordon Childress. As they were looking around the pond, only 2 minutes had passed by when they stumbled upon a set of 2 different footprints and marks on the ground that indicated something or someone was dragged. They immediately went into the pond, and that was when the discovery of Debbie's deceased body was made. More so, she was seemingly put inside of a 55-gallon oil barrel that Debbie had owned to store firewood in. A quick inspection revealed that the barrel from the cabin was actually gone, leaving only a ring-shaped indentation where it used to be. The following day, an autopsy was performed and revealed death by drowning. However, it could not be determined whether the drowning was accidental or if Wolfe was the victim of a homicide. The local sheriff's department claimed that her death was probably accidental. The oil drum that Wolfe was discovered in also went missing, and police denied that she was even ever found in it, insisting that the divers had been mistaken. They believed that the divers had seen her jacket ballooning out from under her from being in the water. However, the divers claimed that what they saw was definitely a barrel. Police investigators believed that she had died accidentally, falling into the pond while playing with her dogs. Her family and friends, however, did not believe this. A few months after Debbie's death, Jenny had a chance to examine the clothes found on her daughter's body. After looking at the clothes, Jenny became convinced that the clothes did not belong to her daughter. The pants appeared to be too large. The field jacket did not belong to her or her brother. She had borrowed one from him, but it was not his. The bra had a cup size that was 3 times too large for her, and the shoes were 3 sizes larger than her normal shoes. However, the police claimed that the clothes did, in fact, belong to her. While conducting their investigation, Jenny recalled that there were 2 men who had an interest in Debbie from a relationship standpoint and who participated in the search efforts. Both men had tried to pursue romantic relationships with Debbie, and both apparently knew where she lived. Jenny believes that one of the suspects took Debbie hostage, kept her alive for several days, and then killed her. She believes that the killer returned later to remove the barrel from the pond so that her death would appear to be accidental. One of the men particularly bothered her, as he had a history of psychiatric illness and often asked her to go out with him on a date. At one point, he was able to get her home phone number and had begun to call her. He even claimed to know where she lived and threatened to come see her. After her body was found, this man was questioned by the police. However, he had an alibi and refused to take a polygraph before skipping town for a week. The other male volunteer was questioned as well, but he was nevertheless cleared. To this day, Debbie's family remains convinced that she was murdered. It was a Monday morning on December 23, 1974, when 17-year-old Rachel Arnold Trileca set out on an afternoon of Christmas shopping at the Seminary South Shopping Center, now known as the Fort Worth Town Center. She was in high school at the time, but had been married to Thomas Trileca for 6 months. Rachel asked her friend, Lisa Renee Wilson, to accompany her to the mall. Lisa agreed. Rachel drove to Lisa's residence to pick her up, when Julie, who was Lisa's neighbor, asked if she could accompany them, and they allowed it under Julie's mother's consent, who wanted her home by 4 o'clock. The 3 girls departed before 12 p.m. and arrived at the Army-Navy store to retrieve Christmas presents that were on layaway. Thereafter, they made their way to Sears at the Seminary South Shopping Center, parking their vehicle on the upper level near the store. Afterward, the 3 girls' whereabouts are unknown. They seemingly vanished into thin air before 6 p.m. Witnesses informed the authorities that they had seen the 3 girls inside the mall during the day. According to the evidence, the 3 had done quite a bit of shopping because there were Christmas presents in bags with receipts in the car, indicating they were relatively safe for the majority of the evening. Several witnesses mentioned similar yet conflicting reports of seeing the trio being lured away by someone. In one account, a woman stated she noticed a couple of grown men pulling the girls away from the parking lot and putting them into a pickup truck on the upper level. Another witness came forward in 1981, 7 years following their disappearances, and stated he saw an unidentified male forcing a girl into a van in the mall's parking lot. He felt concerned and confronted the man, who promptly told him to leave him alone because it was a family matter. Neither of these stories has been verified by authorities. Police initially assumed that the girls had run away, despite no viable motive. Their families, however, insisted otherwise. The following morning, Rachel's husband, Tommy, discovered a peculiar envelope with a letter in his mailbox. It was addressed to Thomas A. Chilica, and the name Rachel was written in the upper left corner of the envelope. The letter stated, quote, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car's in Sears, upper lot. Love, Rachel." Rachel's family, along with her husband, adamantly believed the letter writer was not Rachel. Her name had been misspelled, and the writer had seemingly tried to fix his or her own mistake. Additionally, the letter was too formal, the family felt. It had been addressed to Thomas A. Chilica, Rachel's husband. However, she and everyone else who was friends with Thomas called him Tommy. Furthermore, handwriting experts examined the letter and other various writings by Rachel, and their tests came back inconclusive. In addition, there was no city name on the postmark, only a blurry postal service number, 76083. The number 3 appeared to be printed backwards, leading the family to assume that the 3 was actually an 8. If so, the return address would be the Weatherford, Texas area, a 35-minute commute from Fort Worth. Another possibility was that the zip code 76483, which would be Throckmorton, Texas, approximately 2 hours away. Family members hired a private investigator, John Swaim, after frustrations with the police investigation and hoping to acquire new leads and answers. But Swaim committed suicide in 1979, and his records were destroyed. It is unclear if he uncovered any legitimate information concerning the case. A few months later, law enforcement received a phone call from a psychic living in Hawaii. She told the department they could find the girls' skeletal remains at an oil well, but didn't specify where. The authorities were chasing their own tails until 1981, when an employee working at an oil company in Houston, Texas, unearthed 3 sets of skeletal remains. Tests were done by the local medical examiner, and it was concluded that the remains did not belong to the Fort Worth girls. Rachel's sister, Deborah, claims that their childhoods had been unhappy and that she and Rachel had been frightened of their father, who has since deceased. Deborah was once engaged to Thomas Chilica before his marriage to her sister Rachel, but she says now that the relationship was not serious. Rachel began seeing him afterwards, and the two were married in 1974. Rachel then moved out of the Arnold family home and lived with Thomas. Deborah had been arguing with her then-boyfriend at the same time Rachel and the girls disappeared, and was temporarily living with Rachel and Thomas in December of 1974. Both Deborah and Thomas maintained that their romantic relationship was over by that time, and it was not uncomfortable having all 3 of them living in the same quarters. Rachel asked Deborah to accompany her on the shopping trip on December 23rd, but Deborah decided to stay in bed instead. Deborah was also in the Chilica home the following day when Thomas received the strange letter. 20 years later, in 1995, Rachel's younger brother, Dusty, communicated with another private investigator named Dan James. James and Rusty believe witness reports that Rachel and Lisa were seen alive in the initial days following their 1974 disappearance at various stores and at a gas station. They now believe that both Lisa and Julie are deceased, but that Rachel is alive and being kept from visiting the Fort Worth area by persons unnamed. James does claim that several credible witnesses reported seeing Rachel in the Fort Worth area during the Christmas holidays as recently as 1998. However, James and Rusty also believe that the unidentified persons are maintaining efforts to keep Rachel cloistered away. However, they refuse to detail their evidence, if any, supporting these claims. In 2001, another witness named Butch Hutchins came forward detailing his testimony on what he saw the day of the girl's disappearance. When he was leaving the mall at 11:30 p.m., he came across a security guard in a pickup truck. When they conversed, he saw 3 girls in the front seat of the guard's vehicle. The witness stated that the girls seemed relaxed and were in the vehicle willingly. The authorities managed to locate the security guard. When questioned, he denied the girls were in his truck on the evening of December 23, 1974, and since then, the case has gone cold with very few leads.